Okay, hi, let's begin. We're charting our way through what I have called the sort of central text of preparation for the high holidays. The one thing that you should read if you're going to read one thing to prepare, I think, and that is Maimonides' Hilchot Chuba, his laws of Chuba, right? Which is, that's the word, and that's the subject, and that's the most important thing that we could be thinking about during this time. It's the main theme of the high holidays. It's the focal point for our meditations in Elul. It is, it's fair to say, one of the most important concepts or virtues in, I don't know, like in Jewish tradition. And yet, what is it? Like, what is this thing, tshuva? Because it's not something that we can easily find a source for, the truth is. The word tshuva, which we're going to, in a sec, try and define, the word tshuva, and I keep using the Hebrew word because if I used one of the translations, then that already would be doing some injustice to it, as some of you probably know. Sense. Like the main translation for tshuva is repentance. Okay, so it's that, but that's not the word. So what is tshuva? And part of what makes this difficult is that for all of its glory in the tradition, it doesn't actually appear in the Torah, or I think in the Tanakh at all, right? Which was surprising to me. I went and looked it up today and I was like, surely, now the verb is there and various forms of the verb, but the idea that there's this concept, it's called tshuva, it's a thing that one should do and be thinking about this time of year. That's a rabbinic term, right? Meaning the rabbis of the Talmud started using this word, tshuva. So it's really there that we have to start looking. And by the way, it's no coincidence that it's the rabbis of the Talmud who are so obsessed with tshuva. You don't have a sense of why the rabbis of all people would put so much focus on this process this sort of inner process of whatever it is that we're exploring. Why would the rabbis feel like it's important to go inside in this way? There's a little bit of I don't like this kind of question where I have like an answer in my mind. It's a little bit like a gotcha question, but I want to set it up so that we think for a minute, like, why would the rabbis, the composers of the Mishnah and Talmud, think, oh, we really have to start focusing on tshuva? Jamie, you might have an answer?
Well, maybe it's the only way that they believe that the Messiah could come and return Judaism to its former glory, rebuild the temple. That is ultimately the process that's necessary.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I think I want to put emphasis on two words that you said, which is the only way. It's the only way. Why is it the only way to, I don't know, bring about the righteous future or do whatever needs to be? Why is it the only way? Because, and Shia, do you have a thought? No. Because there's no more temple. These are the people who were living in the aftermath of the destruction of the temple. And so it shouldn't surprise you that these people were obsessed with the power of the inner process of, well, now I'm going to start defining it, and I don't want to do that quite yet. But they don't have another mechanism that you might have used to atone for sins, which is offer sacrifices, appease God, right? That's gone. So the first step in some ways is to see tshuva as a replacement for some earlier way of getting right with God, right? And the rabbis of the Talmud say things like that. Gadol tshuva, Chuba is so great that it even does what the sacrifices used to do, or we don't even need the temple anymore because we have Chuba. Okay, so there's a major paradigm shift, in other words, and there's a kind of a summoning of a new concept. Okay, so what's this new concept? That's what we're going to try and figure out today. But surely, in the wisdom of this group, we have some definitions. I've already tossed out a couple, but can someone give me what if I asked you what is tshuva? Just speak it out in any way you want. What is tshuva? This Hebrew word that I keep saying. How might we define it?
Asking for forgiveness?
Asking for forgiveness. Great. That's going to come up today. So that's in there. What else?
To turn, like to return to our greatest self or to our
Okay.
pure self?
Thank you, Pam. The word tshuva means return. Now that's what Pam said is critical, because we've got a million other translations, four other whatever translations, but it's very awkward to translate it as return. Maimonides' laws of return. Return to what? Pam suggests, well, it's a return maybe to our best selves, a return to the highest version of who we are. That seems like a reasonable translation. So let's keep that one in mind. It literally means returns. What would be returning to, right? Okay. Anybody want to enter in any, what do you associate with tshuva? What's it about? If your friend asks you, hey, I hear you guys are doing tshuva, what is that? What is that? Anyone else? Yeah, Matt.
Well, if we're talking about return, it also could be returning to Israel.
Right. Is tshuva more global? Like, is it a massive process? I mean, this is a little bit, Jamie was pointing us here in this direction earlier. Like, is it about getting back to not just my best self, but to a better state of affairs, right? And part of that, like maybe it's right, that Matt's right that the word is sometimes used that way, to return to the land of Israel. So is there some greater process of tshuva that it's not actually about what's going on in your heart. It's like a thing that you're trying to enact in the world. Great. Other thoughts, Jennifer?
Tikkun, like to repair.
Okay, good. I noted in my promotion of this class that a lot of the words are our words. So like we have repentance, we have return, we have repair, we have rectification, redressing. Like somehow, like in English also, like all these words seem to be like, because it's the re part, right? To go, that's the re is the return, to redo something, to go back to something. So maybe to return to something and fix it. Okay, that's, by the way, that's a very different definition than the one Pam gave. I'm going back to who I really am. That's different than I'm going back and I have to fix something that's broken. Okay. Austin?
Like that one.
Yeah, I'm assuming like if we're returning, that would assume that we turned away from something. So I would assume maybe God. Because
good. That what Austin has given us, I think, if we had to say, well, how the Torah doesn't have the noun tshuva, but how does the Torah use the verb, right, to return? Because the Hebrew Bible does have like some formulation of returning from your evil ways and returning to God and turning back away from something and towards, yes, God in this case. So I think that's a very classic translation also. Okay, I see two hands. I'm gonna take two more and then we're gonna get into Maimonides and see if what he says matches up with what we're saying. It will in some ways, but I'm sure he'll surprise us as well. Andrew.
Self-reflection.
Okay, reflection. Another R word, and very helpful because that's certainly what I associate with tshuva, and it indicates that then tshuva is really, as I've said like so many times in these last classes, there's an inner process. It's inside of you. It's something that's going on inside of you, right? But take note, that might be a limiting definition, because don't you have to do something? Is tshuva, this is an important question, which we'll get to again soon. Is tshuva that's something that happens in me, or is tshuva something that happens out in the world? Very important question. Okay. One last thought from Tali.
I think that I was thinking introspection, but there is definitely an action once it's a two process, that it's an introspection and then there's an action following that introspection to act upon once one reveals what one needs to work on. So the tikkun, that's why tikkun to me also involves an action when you're doing so. And I just always love the idea of missing the mark so that you can start again. It's begin again and renewal, beginning again.
Okay, what Tali says leads us right into our material, because Tali says, don't tell me, is it inside or outside? It's both. Like there's first an internal process, and then you have to take some kind of action. And so let's look out for those pieces, because if we head into Maimonides' laws of Chuba, remember last week we noted that that Maimonides starts with, remember what Maimonides started with? His big discussion last week, the first chapter of the laws of Chuba was all about confession. Sort of interesting, like this is, the second chapter is the one that it feels like we should have started with. Because it's the second chapter where Maimonides really starts giving definitions of, okay, but what is Chuba? And, interestingly or confusingly, he very quickly gives us a lot of different definitions. So we're gonna have to look at a few different paradigms here and try and synthesize them, see, like, is Maimonides just saying a bunch of things, or does Maimonides actually have a system or a theory that he's offering us? One of the great things about studying Maimonides classically is that, when you see two statements in the Talmud, you can't always say, well, those are inconsistent, because they might have just been two different rabbis teaching. But when Maimonides says two different things, you have to ask, well, wait a minute, Maimonides, that was you talking 2 paragraphs ago. So what do you mean here? Like, is it this or is it this? Okay, so with that in mind, the first section of our discussion today will just be definition. We'll just be trying, and we'll see how long that takes us. If we can move quickly enough, we'll eventually get to application. But first, let's just look at definition. Okay, so let me chat you the source sheet for today, and then we'll go look at it collectively. I think you're going to get my Zoom screen at first. Sorry about that. And of course, Zoom places a little bar right in the place where it's so annoying. My life is so hard. Okay, here we go. What is Chuba? So to just tell us, right? You've been going on for a chapter about confession, but these are the laws of Chuba. What is Chuba? So here Maimonides begins. Ezohi Chuva Gmura. What is complete Chuva? Right? The language, here's the word Chuva, and then afterwards, Gmura. So complete Chuva. So what is complete Chuva? And Maimonides has a very particular definition. One who has the opportunity to transgress with a thing they've done before, but separates themselves from it and doesn't do it because of tshuva. Not out of fear or a lack of strength. Okay, I just want to repeat that. What is complete tshuva? One who has the opportunity. Someone who has the opportunity to transgress with a thing they've done before, but separates themselves and doesn't do it because of tshuva, not out of fear or a lack of strength. Okay, that's a very particular definition. And here he's going to give you an example. And the example, by the way, the example is very gendered, and I've tried to neutralize the genders here so we can all just read it as ourselves. But in this case, I just left it because it's a very gendered example. Okay, so here's his example. Okay, how does this work? Someone slept with a woman sinfully, not like, a woman that this person was not supposed to sleep with. Their sister, someone else's wife, someone, I don't know, underage, something sinfully. And sometime later, he finds himself alone with her, and he still loves her. There's interesting language here. V'hu omed ba'avato. He's still in his love. I don't know, like love, lust, whatever, but that's what Maimonides says. And his body is able. He's able to do it. And this is especially weird. And he's in the same country that he sinned in before. He's in the exact same place. If that person then takes off without sinning, that is, and once again, the term is complete tshuva. Okay, so there you have it, a very, very particular definition. Maimonides, well, I don't know, you speak it out for me. What is tshuva according to Maimonides? Yeah, Alexandra.
I think it seems like it's a repair of the character, of one's character, and a repair of that which was weak or lacking, or that's all. That's okay, all.
Good. Good. You've got some defect, some deficiency, some problem, and you fix that, right? But I think Alexandra is right, but that's not enough, because it seems like you could do that without fulfilling this scenario that Maimonides has suggested for us. And Shia?
It sounds like, so a person that sins or transgresses, when presented with the same opportunity, they choose a better path instead of committing the sin over again.
That's right. That's right. Maimonides has a very particular requirement, which is that you did something bad and you get to do it again, and you don't do it again. That's very important to him. So much so that he goes through this sort of absurd example where you not only like are in the same situation with the same woman, but you're make sure that you're not feeling weak, that you really can do it, and you're even in the same country. Like but that's right. There's some requirement that Maimonides has that you can do something for the second time and you choose not to. Why is that so important? Why does that matter, Bob?
Yes, so I think in the class last week, if I remember, he called out specifically that you not only had to confess, but you had to make a promise that you wouldn't do it again. So so here in this example, I mean, what's not included is presumably that person who slept sinfully with a woman had done it before, had confessed, had promised not to do it, and now was confronted with that same situation and truly, lived up to their word not to do it.
That's great. I love the way you framed that for us, Bob, because it's almost like we don't know whether you did tshuva until we see you in the same situation. Like, sure, you were crying and you're so sorry, you'll never do it again. You say you're never gonna do it again. But then you did it again, and it turns out that was BS. You didn't do tshuva. So this starts, now we have to wonder, is this tshuva what Maimonides is talking about, or is this proof of tshuva, right? Or, I don't know, somehow retroactively, is the tshuva only done once you fully activate your commitments? Okay, anyone else want to add to this?
In this, yeah. So in this example, I might have missed it, but I didn't catch that he had already recognized that the sin was there and maybe made amends somehow, especially if it was another man's wife. If he had made amends, because complete tshuva is the whole package, right? Mm-hmm. It's recognizing that you did something, owning it, doing something to make amends, and vowing not to do it again. And then when presented with that situation, don't do it again. So it's like the finale, but we don't know if all of those other things happened.
Great. It's like the finale, but there was no prelude. There was no, it's finale to what? Now, Bob did some helpful work for us by remembering where we were at last week, but Pam's right that in this chapter, sort of, it seems to start kind of already well down the path. Now, in a way, we can answer Pam's concern by moving to this next, we call them halachot, so the next law in Maimonides' laws of Chuba here. But it's weird because we just got a definition of complete Chuba, and now the next law begins, wait, but what is Chuba? I mean, it's like, it reads almost funny. You just told me what it is in its completeness, and yet we still don't actually know what it is. And this is like, Pam is basically taking us right to this question, right? So Maimonides does it a little bit out of order. And I don't have any theories on why. It seems like this should be the first one, but okay. Here's another definition of Chuba, and maybe this is the earlier part that Pam and Bob are referring to. Okay, so what is Chuba? But it's funny, Maimonides, as I said, is gonna give us 2 or 3 definitions, so it's just like not that clear. And remember, he is summarizing hundreds of years of rabbinic tradition. So there's a way in which, like, well, of course he's got to give us a lot of definitions, but he postures himself as if it's just a coherent theory. So we'll try to at least imagine that he sees this as a system. Okay, so this was complete tshuva, but we still haven't defined what is tshuva. Okay, so now he's going to define it for us. The sinner shall cease sinning and remove the sin from their thoughts, yes, v'yasiru mimachshavato, and wholeheartedly decide not to do it again, as it says, let the wicked forsake his way. Also, they should be remorseful about what they did, as it says, for after that I turned and regretted. And they should testify before the one who knows all secrets, that being God, that they will never return to that sin again. As it says, say unto him, neither will we call anymore the work of our hands our gods. Okay, don't worry about the quotes. But okay, he couldn't put it any more straightforward than that. This is tshuva. What is tshuva? You stop sinning, you remove the sin from your thoughts, you wholeheartedly decide not to do it again, and you regret it, and you testify before God. Okay? Now, Pam, does that sound like, oh, okay, this is the earlier, but this is what you do before you get to the opportunity. Does that make sense to you?
Yes,
but
it's still not complete.
What?
Right?
Why?
So if you can't, if the sin involved another person, there needs to be amends with the other person.
Okay, good. Oh, we'll get there too. Pam, your powers of perception are staggering. So Pam's going to take us all the way eventually, but we'll hold her back for now. Okay, this at least sounds a little bit more like it sounds like it happened beforehand, before you get to the opportunity to not do it again. So there's a difference now between tshuva and then complete tshuva, right? So when we're just talking about basic tshuva, before we get to that opportunity, I enumerated all the things that Maimonides lists here, but what seems critical to you? Let me just put it up again. What parts of this seem like, oh, that's essential? It seems like a lot of nice stuff. You don't sin, you remove the sin from your thoughts, you decide not to do it again, you're remorseful, you testify. There's lots of things going on here. What feels like, as you look through that, what do you look at and say, oh, we really ought to take account of that? Hal? Oh, Kathy.
Well, actually, I raised my hand because I have a question. It seems to me that removing the sin from your thoughts, there's a contradiction here, because in fact, you're supposed to think about it a lot. You know, you're in being remorseful and testifying and doing all those things, you have to have it in your thoughts. So it's one of those where, I mean, aren't there other things like that where they say to forget and to wipe out, but then to remember at the same time? I don't know. Anyway, it's
brilliant connection there, Kathy, to the idea of forgetting Amalek, the nation of Amalek, Wipe
Right.
them out. Never make mention of them. Remember to wipe them out. Remember to forget them. Right? A little bit of an irony there. But I mean, but to ask Kathy's question in a different way, what does this mean? How could you possibly be asked to remove the sinning from your thoughts? Like,
Yeah.
that's too much, isn't it?
Yeah, well, and actually I wanted to add just another thing. It's sort of like, you know, in the complete tshuva, you know, you're supposed to face exactly the same situation. You know, that's really how, but the thing is that there's a way in which just avoiding the situation, a lot of times you just avoid a situation, you know, like if you're an alcoholic and you just try to avoid the situation. So that's saying that's really not good enough, so that you need to actually present yourself. And I don't know whether it's going as far as to say that you look for that situation. You know,
okay, but if you do, Kathy, I mean, you're stacking these things up in a very very clever way, because if you get to the point where you have the opportunity to do it again, but you decide not to, surely you're thinking about your sins. I like, what is it? There's something that doesn't make sense here. Like, you got all of these nice things, like you're so sorry and you regret it, and but what's that, like, what? Then you get to the opportunity, and you have to put it all on trial, right? So where does the tshuva happen? What is the actual flow of tshuva in this process? So let's see, Dana, and then Lee.
With that last definition, it looks like the word decide stands out to me because it's a conscious decision. On the first definition, it made me feel a little bit more like it was just a natural thing. You don't have to stop and think about it. But the way that it's written in the second decision, you're faced with this again. You could do it, but you make that decision not to do it. And then going back to the first decision, you're not doing it just because you can't, you don't have the strength to do it, or you're afraid to do it, but you've learned from it.
Yeah. Okay, Dana's done a really beautiful thing here, because Dana's connected this word, wholeheartedly decide, and I think she did it without even knowing the Hebrew, but in the Hebrew, it's yigmor belibo, right, over here, yigmor, which means literally, I translate it as wholeheartedly decide, but it means to complete in your heart, meaning to get to a point of completion in your heart, yigmor. Now, what's really beautiful about what Dana just pointed out is that was the language that we used for tshuva gemura, the same thing, the complete tshuva, right? So there is a kind of like, there are two completions here, right? There's you get to a point where you're all finished inside of you, like you've resolved, you've finished, you've decided, but it's still not finished. There's still another actual finishing that you have to do outside of you, okay? So this is good. Now we're beginning to get a sense of where this is going, okay? And well anticipated by some of you already. Lee?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo Kathy's question and say that there seems to be there's an apparent, to me at least, contradiction in the text where if you say remove the sin from your thoughts, it's all well and good. But in Maimonides' example of how someone who has completed tshuva, he says someone's with a woman that he sinfully slept with before, and he has love for her, which kind of implies that the sin is still in his thoughts.
Right.
That's kind of redundant with what Kathy said, but it seems like there's a narrow place that you could say where there's not actually a contradiction, but I'm not sure how you get there.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's not. What I guess I want to know. What do you think? What actually is tshuva? Meaning, Maimonides is presenting us with a system that has so many parts that it begins to contradict itself. And this is a smart crowd. So, Kathy, Lee, we're pointing out some of these contradictions. It doesn't really seem like the guy in the situation with the woman has purified his thoughts completely. No, on the contrary, he's right back there, and it's so close, and he's like, okay, wait, no, I won't do it. So where does the tshuva happen? And I guess, I don't want to just leave it in the realm of parsing Maimonides and analyzing text. I want to ask more broadly, when do you think the tshuva happens? Like when do you do tshuva? Do you do it when you decide in your heart? Does it require you to, what Maimonides is giving us a whole sweep of events, but what's the tshuva? I mean, what do you think? Let's see.
I can't.
Sorry, someone just came in.
Yeah, it's Nori Hawk. I just, are we raising our hands? Is that how we
Yes.
speak?
Yes,
Okay,
we are. But
fine.
you're in. You did it.
Okay.
Go
So
for it.
I just want to say that I think tshuva essentially is a very personal experience. And I think giving all these alternatives makes it human, because we're all human, we're not perfect, and everybody does tshuva in their own way. And I think there are different levels of tshuva, and everybody tries to achieve the best that they can in their own personal life.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nora. I mean, that's one way to deal with this mess that Maimonides leaves us, is to say, well, Maimonides is talking about the multifaceted nature of tshuva. There are many different parts of it, many different experiences, right? That's certainly one possible reading here, is we're actually being told of the various tshuva actions and feelings that are possible. Hannah?
I'm thinking a lot about the tension that seems to be proposed here between thought and feeling versus action. And it seems like in the complete tshuva, the tshuva happens because of the action or the lack of action, and it's not actually about the completion of any kind of thought or getting rid of a thought or a feeling. If anything, it's you may still have those impulses, but you choose to act differently in the face of that, and you take contrary action to what you've done before, as opposed to with the other version of tshuva, which is the opposite. It's not about action, it's about all the steps you take before action, but that there seems to be a priority here or a preeminence here to the action, which I think in some ways feels very Jewish, that so much of what we have to do is do the things we're doing, not talk about the things or think about them or feel them, but what are you doing about it? Because you can think all sorts of things, but it doesn't translate into action. And so I'm just wondering about what that tension is and where that leads us. But I think there's something powerful in feeling like the actual completion of this process is when you are able to make a different choice in the face of the same thoughts and feelings.
Great. So I'm hearing a vote for a definition of tshuva that involves some kind of living out of the inner experience, right? That Hannah even suggests that there's something that feels very Jewish about that. This is an action-oriented religion. So what do other people think? I mean, I'm just asking you, forget about Maimonides, but is the work that we're shooting for, of course it's good to live it, but like, what is tshuva? Is it something that happens inside of you, or can it only happen by playing it out outside of you, right? Because let's be clear, that's limiting in a different way. Like, what if you don't get in the same situation with the same woman in the same country, and like, that doesn't always happen. So that's like an odd requirement to add, right? Okay, let's see. Who hasn't spoken for, I think everyone has spoken. And Shia.
I think that, like, if we're using the example from the text, the desire to do better and go down a better path has to be stronger than the desire to, commit the sin again, in order for, things to, the desire to do good has to be stronger than the desire to do bad in order to, repent.
Yeah, I think that's right in that first scenario, but it's a funny thing, because if you're in the first scenario, it feels almost like, if I can just get my good desire 51%, I'll be fine, right? Whereas the definition of tshuva seemed like it was like, no, it was about being 100%, right? Like, you remove it from your heart.
But he wasn't 100% in the example, though.
Right,
He still had
right. The example may be a way of saying, like, yeah, okay, tshuva is aspirational. You want to not think about it. You want to not like have it. You want to be completely sure, but you actually don't know until you get there, right? And this was Bob's point earlier. Okay, let's take a couple more thoughts and then we'll head a little further. Rhoda?
I think it has also something to do with in a similar situation, but different, because you'll never be right in the same situation again. Can you stop and be intentional enough to utilize what you've learned for a much better result?
Yeah.
So in other words, can you elevate yourself by taking that lesson and using it for a much better result than you would have gotten had you not learned that lesson?
Yeah. So it really is about what you're doing, which is so lovely, is you're saying, yes, it's about action, but even in the action, it's also about a presence of mind. It's also about a kind of a transformative inner experience that now yes, of course that plays out in certain ways, but it has to be you're different inside. And that's something about Chuba seems to do with who you are inside, what's going on inside of you, okay?
Much more articulate, thank you.
Okay, on that note, I want to take us to Maimonides. I told you, gives us like all smattering of definitions. Here's yet another one that Maimonides gives us, and think about what he is saying about the self and how the self changes through the process of tshuva. So first he gave us complete tshuva, then he gave us, well, what is basic tshuva? And now he's going to talk to us about darchei tshuva, the ways of tshuva. So take a look at what he says here. Okay, so you go through this inner process, and maybe you have an opportunity to live that out by being in the same situation. But then he says, there are ways of tshuva. Among the ways of tshuva, okay, it seems to be yet another definition, or at least like examples of how this works. Here are the various things one can do. The one doing tshuva can cry out in tearful supplication before God, give tzedakah according to one's means, to distance oneself exceedingly from the thing in which one sinned, to have one's identity changed, as if to say, I am now another person and not that person who perpetrated those misdeeds, to completely change one's conduct from the good and straight path, and to exile oneself from one's place of residence, for exile atones iniquity because it leads to submissiveness and to being meek and humble-spirited. Okay, it's like a total mess at this point. Like, okay, we did a lot of work to try and negotiate. Well, there's all this inner work, and then there's being in the same situation. And now Maimonides just has a bunch of other stuff. Give charity, cry out to God, change your identity, leave your place. Like, where is he going with all? Look, how there's action involved, but what is he getting at? Where does this take us? Okay, there were hands up before. You don't have to answer this question. What, Pam?
So this actually goes nicely with what I was going to say on the last one. It's that, so getting to this, change your identity, and before we were talking about erasing a thought, I think that we might have the same thoughts, but our relationship to those thoughts is different. How we regard that same piece of information, or how we regard that desire. It's not like, oh, so the example that was given, this man has this love for this woman, but he's changed his relationship with it and no longer craves to be with this woman, and instead can just recognize that love, appreciate it, and move on. And by changing his thoughts, he's actually changed who he is, how he acts in the world.
Okay. So we're starting to get at a definition of tshuva, which is about self-transformation. You are, and it's very extreme language he used. I don't know if everyone here likes this language. You're a different person. You're not you. You're not the same you that did this before, right? So you go through that. Pam's done a great job, really, of synthesizing this for us. You go through this process. It's inside of you. Then you go and you test it, and you don't do the same thing. And the reason that you don't do the same thing is because you are different. You're not David Kasher anymore. You're a new guy who went and did tshuva, and now you act in different ways. So we're looking for a definition of tshuva. Maybe it's about self-transformation, a kind of an evolution. right? A loss of one identity and a claiming of a new identity. It's pretty radical. I wonder what you think of that definition of tshuva. Okay, Jamie's got a hand up from before.
Yes, no, that's exactly what I was going to say, that I think it's self-transformation. I think it's transforming the midot, transforming your, I don't think it's changing who you are. It's just transforming your negative attributes, perfecting them.
Okay, all right. You're still David Kasher, but you're not David Kasher the jerk, right? Now you're David Kasher the nice guy, right? Yeah, okay. Because that is, I find that to be very scary language also. Like, leave your identity behind, leave your place behind. There's something like too annihilating about that. So self-transformation sounds all very nice and well, but right? This is almost diametrically opposed from returning to your truest self, right? But Jennifer offers us a kind of a way of having it both ways. Like, maybe you return to the true good part of yourself, right?
Because your true self is good.
Yeah.
The true self of all of us is good. So I think it's no contradiction. It is returning to your true self, and the true self doesn't want to do those bad things and feels better about yourself when you're not doing them.
Okay, great. Thank you. Jamie.
I want to say that I feel like the elephant in the room with this discussion is psychology. And Maimonides is writing pre-psychology, and I think we often have a tension these days between a conventional idea of morality, which is sort of like, just be better, don't do that thing ever again, just search your heart, do the right thing, and it'll, and then the right will be done. But we also have, this expanding and giant school of psychology and all the subtleties that say changing yourself is extremely difficult. Like, so I think of Kathy's example of AA, and it's like, how long, a person who's an alcoholic, it takes their entire life. They consider themselves an alcoholic their entire life. They never really feel transformed. I don't want to speak, in a complete binary, or someone who might say, like, I want to repent for my inborn racism or my inborn sexism or my inborn classism. And it's like, there are certain actions I can take, but I also know that that's a lifelong psychological journey that I can cry out to God, but it's also, there's just an ongoing probing that I need to do. I think we kind of, there's that tension that's always there.
Yeah, look, Jamie confronts us with a really difficult question, right? We were wondering if formulations like leaving one's identity behind felt extreme, or do we really require being in the same place with the same person? But on some level, doesn't all of this feel a little beyond us? I mean, you really want to get to a point where you just know you're never going to do it again. How do you ever get to that point, right? Here, Nori's comments are actually very helpful. Like, shouldn't we look at tshuva more as a palette of various spiritual possibilities that we might use to work on this? And isn't there a kind of a softer and more malleable, this is so extreme, it's so demanding that we actually have to get to, whether it's internal or external, it has to be this almost complete transformation in a way that Jamie is suggesting psychologically is just not possible. And Kathy was suggesting this early on, like, what does it mean to really never think of something again? Okay. I want to realize that we're sort of moving out of time. There's at least one thing that I want to do with you all before we finish. So let me take you quickly towards the end. I gave us the whole chapter here and didn't expect us to finish it all, but I'll give you a sense of how it proceeds. So Maimonides, Maimonides says, there's all these ways of doing tshuva. That includes, of course, the confession. We spent time studying this last time, so we're not going to go through it again. And then he starts talking about a famous line here, even though it's always appropriate to do tshuva and call out to God, during the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it's especially appropriate, right? So this is like a special time. Yom Kippur is the time set aside for tshuva for all. So everything, and the truth is we don't have time right now, but I think it's worth thinking, why is it good to have a set aside time? Why is it important, given everything that we've said, and even though it's great to do tshuva all the time, why would you have a special appointed time to do tshuva? But the truth is, what I'm really eager to do is run to halacha 8 here. 9, towards the end here, because this we've so far just been talking about what is it, how do you do it, how do you get there, what's going on inside of you, what do you need to do to effectuate it, but now we're going to start applying it in some interesting ways that have to do with the different kinds of tshuva that you do depending on the sin that you've done, okay? And in particular, it's this distinction between the sins committed against God and the sins committed against people that I want to end on today. Okay, so Chuba and Yom Kippur only atone for the sins committed against God. So if you do Chuba, right, you do the inner work, and you go through Yom Kippur and you're forgiven, that's great for the sins committed against God. For example, one who ate forbidden food or had forbidden sex. Forbidden sex is a funny one, because obviously you can commit a sexual sin against someone, but here I think Maimonides is imagining two consenting adults who are nevertheless, I don't know, committing incest or something. Okay, so those things you just do tshuva for inside of you, but sins between people, for example, one injures one's neighbor or curses one's neighbor or steals from one's neighbor, etc., are never forgiven until one pays back what one owes and begs the forgiveness of one's neighbor. And even though one makes restitution of the monetary debt, one is still obligated to appease one's neighbor and ask for forgiveness, right? Even if one is one only offended one's neighbor with words, one is obliged to appease them and implore them until one is forgiven by them, right? If one's neighbor refuses to forgive, one should bring a row of 3 friends to confront one's neighbor and request forgiveness. If the neighbor still refuses, one should bring a second and even a third group, okay? So what's the principle here? What's the principle? You can do tshuva for sins that you have committed against God, things you feel bad about, but nobody's actually really been hurt by. But in order to do tshuva for sins that you committed against other people, what is essential? What's essential? What do you need to do tshuva gemura? Right? Like, it was great. You had the scenario where you were with the woman in the same country and you didn't hook up with her. You're so happy with yourself. Well, that's not good enough. Because if you actually hurt someone, what, Tali?
It has to be an upfront interaction of asking for that forgiveness from that person. It has to be in person, say, this is what I do. I'm asking for your forgiveness.
Okay.
So
that's a yes, but that's not all. Yes, you have to do that. And this, we've been discussing this. You have to really be in that situation. You live it out, actions, great. But there's more here. It's not just that you have to confront the person.
That's the other part.
They have to forgive you.
They have to forgive you. It has to be forgiven.
They have to forgive you. So this is remarkable. We've been talking so much about how do you go through this transformation in your inner life, and or maybe you have to be in the situation, or you have to be a different kind of person. Okay, and then all of a sudden Maimonides turns around and says, yeah, all of that is true for not keeping kosher. That you have to be back at Burger King and not order the cheeseburger, right? That, fine. But when it comes to sins against other people, you actually cannot do tshuva unless they forgive you. Let's just take a look at this language again, because it's wild. It's a wild thought. I feel terrible. I'm a different person. I would never murder your parents again, right? Well, great, you feel terrible, but that's not enough. that only works for sins committed against God. But if someone injures you or curses you or steals from you, that person cannot be forgiven until, first of all, they pay back everything that they owed, but then you have to grant them forgiveness. So you go and you beg them for forgiveness, and if they refuse, you go back and you beg them again. You bring people with you. Please forgive me. Please. But then there's a twist. Because if the neighbor refuses refuses a second time, if the neighbor refuses, you bring a second group and even a third group. But after 3 times, if the neighbor then remains obstinate, one may leave him to himself and move on, for then the sin rests upon him who refuses forgiveness. Okay, now we've been trying to map out a system here, right? Trying to understand, like, what is Maimonides talking about? And there certainly seems to be a kind of a logic to this system, okay? We talked about how it's inner work, but it has to be lived out in the world. And the way that works is you have to have an opportunity to do it in the world. But all of that, the regret, I'm never going to do it again, all that, as contradictory and confusing as it was, that all had to do with sins against God. When it comes to sins against a person, you need their forgiveness. But you try very, very hard to get it. And then if you don't, like if you do it 3 times and they refuse, somehow, I don't know, you tell me, the sin leaves now and moves to them. Now they've got the problem. You're done. Right? Am I reading this right? Does that sound right? What do you think of this? Sophia, Jacob? One or the other? Both?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel a little uncomfortable with this because I sort of think to some of the discussions in the wake of Me Too, and there was a discussion of what forgiveness meant. And I don't know, I kind of do feel like someone has the right not to forgive, or the right not to forgive for, a long time at least. And those 3 groups of friends maybe meant something different when Maimonides wrote it, but I can think of, online trolls saying like, look, this abuser is saying sorry. Like, why won't you accept it? That's what the groups of friends coming to your door are in today's world. So I don't know. I think there surely is some amount, like if someone really is contrite, there is an incumbency to forgive at some point. But I don't know. I feel uncomfortable with how soon it seems like he's saying it should happen.
Beautiful. Very well framed. Let me take some people who haven't spoken yet. Jack?
Yeah, hi, David. I was raised my hand in response to an earlier subject matter, but what seems that the work that Maimonides is trying to do is take religion out of the blanket. You're a human being. Your drives control who you are. And make people individuals, and say, I understand as individuals you have trouble forgiving. I understand as individuals you are tempted to steal or to curse. But we want a way so that everyone remains integrated in the community. And, just like it really is kind of preschool, right? It's like, all right, kids, you all have to get along. Stop pulling, Pamela's hair or something like that.
Yeah.
It's and that's different than the idea of religion, which is more authoritarian.
I love the picture you've drawn for us, Jack, because I think you're right to say that when we start talking about Chuba, right, it seems like we're talking about an inside job, an inside experience. Right? And then very quickly we understood, no, there's got to be some way of living it out in the world. And I think actually now that we're seeing that actually Chuba has this whole system where you go to someone and you bring people to them and they're supposed to respond in a certain way. There's this whole, it's like, and you said it's a little bit like preschool. It's like setting the rules, like how do we treat each other? And that's really like, that's a different paradigm. It isn't, Chuba is this virtue, this idea which you strive for just in your heart. Although that's true, that's not enough. Chuba also has to, it has to be played out in real life. And that means tshuva, if once we all as a society recognize its virtue, then there are certain rules for, we need to actually acknowledge, like there are times of the year when we know everybody's engaged in it, and we should expect people to come up to us during those times, and we should feel free to go up to other people during those times, and you should sort of expect that the person's going to forgive you. There are social rules here. If we're really going to be able to do this, if we're really going to be able to heal, then everybody's got an obligation. Now Jacob's concerns, though, notwithstanding, right? Like, are we really obligated to forgive one another? Right? Maimonides, by the way, this is the last text we'll look at tonight. Maimonides makes it quite clear that we are. Maimonides says, it is forbidden, asur ladam, forbidden for a person to be cruel and unforgiving, for one must be easily appeased and slow to anger. And when a sinner implores someone for pardon, that person should grant pardon wholeheartedly and eagerly. Even if someone persecuted them and sinned against them exceedingly, one should not be vengeful and grudge-bearing. For such is the path of the seed of Israel. And then he goes and, talks some smack about idolaters, who he says doesn't do this. So we'll leave aside there. That's, I think, Jack, you're describing something very, very grand here, which is there's a whole society of tshuva. There's a community of tshuva. We require the communal rules to be shaped such that we can actually do tshuva, because honestly, if I hurt you and you never forgive me, I may do all the work in the world inside of myself, but fundamentally, I haven't really done tshuva. Now that's a very strict standard, but that seems to be the suggestion. Okay, Pam.
Okay, thank you. So I think the other side of this is the importance of forgiving is not just so that you can do tshuva. The importance of forgiving is because carrying around that anger is going to hurt the one that was sinned against, right? That there somehow seems, although it's not spoken here and I haven't seen it taught, but there's a wisdom to, someone's come to you many times and they've really changed, and it's not helping you to hold on to that anger. In order for you to evolve, in order for you to move forward in your life, let go of that anger, show compassion towards the person and towards yourself, because the anger is only hurting you at that point.
Right. I mean, what you're saying is there's something sneaky about what you're saying, and maybe something sneaky about what Maimonides is saying, which is that if tshuva is done, it transforms not just the penitent, but the one wronged. Right? The system actually is supposed to transform our whole relationship to one another. And actually, too bad, I'm sorry, you, the one harmed, has to participate in that. Right? We're gonna take two last comments and then we'll close. One from Susan and one from Shoshana. You done, Shoshana?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I kind of agree that the Rambam has an overall view for society and what works, in the sense that, we're supposed to be the light unto the nations. And, I need to be clean in my heart, so I do have to ask forgiveness over and over again if necessary. But then if the one that I wronged is unable or unwilling to forgive, he then or she then becomes the obstacle to the free flow of love and communication in the society. And I think everybody is hurt by it, especially if we look at the idea of chet as an archery term. And so that, when I'm in sin, I've missed the mark. And if really the object is to hit the mark and to live according to Torah principles, then everybody is equally responsible to ensure that that works, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And look, I mean, we need each other to do this, is the bottom line. Because the picture that Maimonides is drawing for us is one in which, we're pretty lucky when it comes to, our kind of the sins against God, the things that we feel bad about but that aren't really hurting anyone. We're lucky because there's a period of time where God's really listening, and you know what? If you do it right, God's just going to forgive you. Just confess and say that, okay, it's all going to work out. But those, I mean, the majority, at least of my sins, are ones that I've done to other people. And that, you're stuck. Like, we really need each other. And yeah, of course I can transform inside myself, but my ideal here is that things are different. I act differently. I have a different relationship to you. And I can't do that without you. I need you in order to really, right? Tshuva Gemura, that was where we started. Well, that's easy enough to do with God, but I mean, it's not so easy, actually. You have to be in the same situation and all the requirements there. But most difficult is the tshuva that we need from one another. And so we have an obligation during this season to be actually seeking forgiveness from one another in a very real, it's not going to shul and saying, hey, I'm so sorry. Maimonides says, with the full force of the tradition, that doesn't work. You cannot go to shul and say, oh, I'm so sorry I hurt Tali. She's, she must feel really bad, but God, will you forgive me? No, Tali has to forgive me. That doesn't work, right? So we have to go and we have to seek forgiveness. But the other sort of major takeaway that Maimonides sort of ends with is that we have to forgive. We have to be, and I'm still holding on to Jacob's question, and there may well, maybe I'll just end on this. Like, what do you do with someone who has killed or raped or done terrible things to you and your family? I mean, you're expected to forgive them, and so quickly? Well, the only thing I can say is Maimonides doesn't seem to think that it's always quick, right? This, for all of the paltry confessions and begging for forgiveness that we hear in our world, this is a person who goes and asks for forgiveness, doesn't get it, comes back, brings an audience of people so they can beg again. That doesn't work, again. That doesn't work, again. And then finally, there is a point where we say, okay, at this point, anyone should reasonably forgive that person. So I don't know what that point is. I don't know what that process looks like, but it's not straightforward. And even as we are being called to forgive people, we are being reminded that, sometimes it's going to take a lot of work on their part, right? So let's keep that in mind as well. Okay, I think we'll end tonight. Any last questions? People, the class is over. Feel free to depart. We're at 7:03, but I'll stick around if people have final thoughts or questions. I see Hal, I see Tali, I see Pamela, I see Susan. Anyone else? Anyone in there want to speak up? Kathy?
Yeah, I was going to say that I was really struck when you were reading the text, about the three people that you bring if the person doesn't forgive. And then you do that 3 times, and it's just, I was thinking, wow, that's getting to be a pretty elaborate process. But it seems to me that this whole discussion of Chuba as being not just a personal thing, but a community. It's really the community dealing with forgiveness, and so that it's like a minion. It's 3 groups of 3 people that you bring, that the person who's done the offense. So it's like 10 people, and so it's kind of anyway. I really like that about that whole process, that that in those very, very difficult situations, it becomes like the community, really.
Yeah. It's almost like, okay, we can't work this out just between the 2 of us. The only way we're ever going to resolve this is if everyone huddles around us. And somehow in the face of the community, we have to, right? Like a 2-person standoff could last forever, but with everybody starting to gather around us, it's like, come on, just forgive Kathy. Come on, just, not you, Kathy. Let's see, Susan.
This discussion has been great, but it's been something that actually has been very important to me every year, to make sure that I have a conversation with people who perhaps I have hurt inadvertently, because there's things that one can say, especially as I get older, that I forget about. but that may have been hurtful and it wasn't intentional. But that's my tshuva that I think that we're talking about, is that you have to have this relationship between people before you are able to go into Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So thank you for the class. It's been something, I guess, that I think about and do every year.
Thanks so much for that comment, Susan, because I think there's a piece missing here that feels very important to, certainly to my process, sounds like to yours too, which is, what about those sins? Well, what about I don't know when I hurt somebody, you know? Like, we're talking about a relationship here and being in dialogue with one another. Like, probably the truth is most of the harms that I've done, I'm not even aware of. Someone felt terribly wounded by something I said, and I don't even know it. So what is, I think there's a big question that you're sort of like suggesting here, which is, what is the responsibility that we have? The tradition doesn't seem to name it at all. The responsibility that we have to go to someone and say, hey, like, we're not right. I'm hurt and you don't even know it. And I need to talk to you about it so that you can do tshuva. Like, that's a bold thing to do, but is that also part of the conversation? I think it's worth asking. So thank you. Let's see, Rhoda.
I was just going to say that, Kathy, a little bit different than you. You know, it can't be that people use their influence with their friends to, you know, to sort of say that what they did was right. So the person that they want to forgive them, maybe they're influencing their friends to their point of view, and maybe their point of view is very hurtful for the other person. So I'm not sure that always bringing other friends or family, etc., to attest for you, I'm not always sure how pure or helpful that is. It could also be very hurtful for the other person that could feel ganged up on.
Yeah. This is complicated stuff. To really map out these social dynamics, this is complicated stuff.
Yeah. You know,
let's see, Tali.
Yeah, what I was thinking through all this about the bedtime Shema, that it's almost like that we can't go to sleep without going through that mini teshuvah process also. That it's so ingrained in, you know, even from saying Kabbalah, saying before he was creating the world, the teshuvah was part of the world. It is such a essential part of who we are as people and as a nation, who we are. But at the same time, I was thinking about what was said. I don't know if it's Susan, that sometimes it's not even words, that we don't even realize that a glance, that's everybody's perception is so different that things are misunderstood. You could look at someone in such a way that could be hurtful. That stays with him. How I felt dished or not noticed. That some people carry this and they carry them through life. So the fact that whether I don't know that if I had, that it's such a beautiful thing, because we don't know when we're saying tone of voice, when we're not coming from a place of chesed, and so often we slip into a place of gavor, a place of judgment, without even realizing how someone else is perceiving it. A child from a parent, so or a parent, you know, or a spouse. So that I think it's very important. But I still have trouble with how instance a child being abused by a parent. It's situations like that. I've always I've struggled with those situations personally. In life. I really have, and yet I know that what was said, that you don't, that moving forward is so essential for yourself in the forgiveness process, that that I think you become like Pharaoh Dick, you know, that it's like you're choking yourself in the process.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Few more comments that we'll end in 5 minutes either way, but we'll keep taking comments till then. Inshia?
So I wrote in the chat that I think it's okay in certain cases for people to choose not to forgive And I gave the examples of someone kills your child or they molest your child. But then people like talked about other things in the chat, and they said that if you choose not to forgive that person, then the sin will be on you, and then you're living with a grudge. But at the same time, this person killed your child, so you know, maybe forgiveness will take many years.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the way that we were discussing it in through the language of Maimonides. It sounded like it was a transference of guilt. Like, you didn't forgive, your fault now. Now you own it. But there's another way of thinking about it, which is that everybody's just trying to be free of this. And so it's not about whether a person ought to, in that paradigm, it's not about whether a person ought to forgive or the person deserves forgiveness, but that everybody in the situation on some level wants to be released from this pain that encompasses us all. And that, you know, I'm looking now in the chat, people have, you know, have talked about lots of situations that, you know, we can't imagine easily forgiving. So this is not, whatever we're talking about, it's not just like, it's not as straightforward as just saying, yeah, well, you got to do it. You know, it's complicated, but it may be to the benefit of all, is the suggestion here. Yeah. Alexandra?
I have a strange question. Does Maimonides talk about past lives at all? I know that's in like some Jewish thought. I was wondering if he ever talks about it.
You know, he doesn't talk about past lives, but it's an interesting point, because I think there is some, we've been suggesting the possibility that you could not do, like that you can't actually effectuate your tshuva completely. And in fact, I left off before maybe we'll end with this. I left off with this idea that it's forbidden for a person to be cruel and unforgiving, but there is actually one more law, which is really interesting, which is that one who committed a sin against a friend and the friend died before he asked his forgiveness should bring 10 adults to his grave and say, I have sinned against the Lord God of Israel and against this man. I didn't translate this one because I didn't think we were going to look at it, so I didn't regender it. But this man, and I have done against him thus and such, naming the sins. If he was indebted to him, he should return the money to the heirs. In other words, there is a real fear at the end, and I'll let you pick up on this, Alexander, if you want to, but there's a real fear that Maimonides has, that like, given the system we've set up, it is possible that you simply won't. What if the person you hurt died? Where are you getting your tshuva there? And it's like trying to figure it out. The Kabbalists would deal with that in a different way and say, well, there are gilgulim, you're reincarnated, and your next version has to work out some of that harm. Do you want to add any thought to that?
Sure. Just that what struck me throughout this is the humility required in doing tshuva, and also to help those who have harmed you in doing tshuva. And I guess the idea that we can't really know, how did we harm this person in a previous lifetime? And if we forgive them when they come and ask us, not only is it doing ourselves a favor, it's also like completing like perhaps a much larger cycle than we're aware of. And the idea that tshuva is never really done. And we never really know if it's complete because there's so many layers.
You know, I mean, that's important for us to reflect on at this moment in our country's history, when so many of the things that we need to atone for are things that earlier generations have done, but maybe we're not reincarnation people, but we're in this cycle of tshuva that doesn't go away unless it is actually atoned for at some point, right? So there is some way in which we can think about the lingering tshuva that needs to be done even after the death of all of the parties involved. Okay, I think we're at time, so I'm sorry for the people I didn't get to tonight. Great discussion this evening. We'll pick up again next week and continue our discussion. We've kind of gotten the definitions out of the way so we can get a little more practical from here on out.